There's an old saying that's been around for thousands of years. What goes around comes around. I've always believed in it. One summer, a friend of mine, who's a nurse at a local hospital, told me about an incident involving a patient he was caring for. Let's call this patient John Miller, as a nod to my fondness for adventure novels and because he lost his right leg in a car accident, quite reminiscent of a tragic hero. John was a businessman. It was a Sunday morning, around 10 a.m., when he left his home near Main Street, intending to cross the street to a cafe to meet friends. He was halfway across the crosswalk under a green pedestrian signal when suddenly a van struck him. Strangely enough, if the van had been speeding through a red light, one would expect John to have been thrown into the air. But instead, the van seemed to just topple over him, its front wheel pinning down his right leg, leaving him in excruciating pain and unable to free himself. Soon, the police, firefighters, and paramedics arrived. The firefighters lifted the van with a jack, and the paramedics pulled John out and rushed him to the hospital. Meanwhile, the police began their investigation. The van driver was bewildered, claiming he was waiting at the red light when suddenly pushed forward, insisting it wasn't his fault. Surveillance footage reviewed by the police showed both vans stopped at the red light, but there was no sign of any other vehicle hitting the van that struck John. However, it did appear as though the van was jolted forward by an unseen force. The black tire marks on the road and the investigation into the van's tires suggested that its handbrake was engaged at the time of the incident. This bizarre accident became a conundrum for the authorities. Who was at fault here? In the hospital, John had to have his right leg amputated due to a severe fracture. During his recovery, my nurse friend often chatted with him. John confessed that he thought this might be his karma catching up with him. He revealed that 12 years ago, he had accidentally hit a woman holding a doll at this very intersection while driving a truck. Panicked, he fled the scene, especially since his license plate was too dirty to be identified and there were no surveillance cameras back then. But now, he felt he was paying the price for his past actions. John became quite somber during this time, his hair graying rapidly. After being discharged, he opened a small diner near the accident site. The most popular dish was his melancholic soul food, a testament to his remorse. However, not long after, his diner was hit by a truck. Believing that the restless spirit of the woman he hit was still seeking retribution, he disappeared without a trace soon after. The story of John Miller spread through our small town like wildfire, a modern-day tale of karma and consequence. People were both intrigued and unnerved by the mysterious circumstances of his accident and his subsequent actions. As for me, the story left a profound impact. It made me think about the ripple effects of our actions, seen and unseen. The idea that our past deeds could somehow circle back to us in ways we never expect was both fascinating and terrifying. I often found myself at John's now abandoned diner, staring at the spot where his life took a drastic turn. The diner, once a symbol of his guilt and redemption, now stood as a haunting reminder of the unresolved past. It was as if the place itself was imbued with a sense of melancholy and mystery. The accident at Main Street became a subject of many discussions. Some believed it was just a freak accident, a tragic coincidence. Others, however, whispered about the supernatural, about spirits and vengeful ghosts. But most, like me, pondered the moral of John's story, the inescapable nature of karma. The diner eventually was demolished, and in its place a small park was built. A bench was placed near the spot where John's diner once stood. It became a place for reflection, a quiet spot in the hustle of the town where people could sit and ponder the twists and turns of life. As years passed, John Miller's story became a part of local folklore, a cautionary tale that reminded us all of the unseen threads that connect our actions to our fate. It served as a reminder that sometimes justice and retribution come in the most unexpected ways, and that the past, no matter how buried, can resurface in the most unexpected of ways. And so, the saying, "what goes around comes around," took on a deeper meaning in our town, a reminder of the invisible forces that shape our lives, for better or for worse. My name is Mrs. Smith, and for years I've worked as a cleaning staff in a high-end residential complex. This job, with its regular hours and decent pay, has always been a source of contentment for me. But there's one experience that still lingers in my mind, an incident so bizarre that I sometimes question its reality. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and I was finishing up in the above-ground garage. As I was about to leave, I received a call from my supervisor. There was a mess in the underground garage. Someone had gotten sick, and the residents were complaining about the smell. Sighing at the delay, I grabbed my cleaning supplies and headed down. The underground garage was dimly lit, a stark contrast to the drizzling outside. The smell of rain mixed with the metallic tang of the garage was unsettling. As I quickly cleaned up the mess, eager to finish, I heard the roar of an engine. Vroom, vroom! Startled, I looked around, but the noise abruptly stopped. Just as I was gathering my tools, a commotion caught my attention. "Move it!" a man's voice yelled aggressively. "Get out of the way!" he shouted again. Then a woman's voice, strained and desperate. "You can't go." I followed the voices and saw a high-end car, maybe a sports model, parked a few yards away. I couldn't make out the man in the driver's seat, but the woman standing in front of the car was vividly clear. She wore a wine-red dress, her hair in a ponytail, and dark red flats. She looked delicate, almost pitiable. The man in the car yelled again, and the engine roared to life. The woman stood her ground, her eyes wide with defiance. Then, in a shocking moment, the car lurched forward, running over her. I screamed, dropping my cleaning tools in horror. But then, something unbelievable happened. The woman got up as if nothing had happened, adjusting her shoulders and neck with a grotesque motion. Her face contorted into a sinister smile. Enraged, the man drove over her again, but each time she rose, her actions more unnerving than the last. I was frozen in terror, witnessing this impossible scene. Eventually, I ran out of the garage, the cool rain somewhat calming my frayed nerves. Back in my days in the countryside, I had heard tales of spirits and unexplained phenomena. But I never took them seriously until that day I convinced myself that the man must be haunted by the woman's spirit. A few days later, while cleaning the same garage, I saw a young man who looked eerily familiar. It took me a moment, but I realized he was the driver from that day. Concerned, I approached him. "Young man," I called out. "The other day, in the rain, I saw you and a woman in a red dress arguing, then..." He looked at me, a mix of surprise and fear in his eyes. "You saw that?" he stammered. I nodded. "You should seek help. It looks like you're troubled by something. Unclean. It's not good to let it linger." He thanked me with a weary smile and drove off. The incident left me unsettled. I asked around, especially the older staff like Mrs. Chen, about any rumors or strange occurrences in the garage. She whispered about sightings of a woman in red, wandering the garage at night, accompanied by the sound of a car engine, though no car was seen. One winter morning, as snowflakes began to fall, I felt a chill unrelated to the cold weather. While cleaning, the lights in the garage flickered ominously. Then I heard a melancholic tune, like a sad lullaby, echoing through the space. Trembling, I turned to see the woman in red from before, this time holding what seemed like a child. She looked different. The malice was gone, replaced by a deep sorrow. "You're not cold?" I blurted out, my voice shaking. I'm dead," she replied, her eyes warming slightly. I stammered. "I'm about to finish my shift." "I won't scare you," she said softly. "My name is Jane. This is my child." We talked, and she revealed her tragic story. 5 years ago, she and her boyfriend, Alex, had argued over his reckless driving. Pregnant at the time, she wanted him to change his ways. In a fit of anger, she got into his car, leading to a fatal accident. "Every night we relive that argument," Jane confessed. "He wants to move on, but I can't let go. I'm filled with resentment." I listened, feeling a profound sadness for her. "Jane, holding on to this anger only hurts you and your child. Let him go. Find peace." After a moment, she nodded, tears streaming down her face. That night, she and Alex appeared to me one last time, thanking me before disappearing into the snow. Since then, the garage has been peaceful, the lights stable. Sometimes when the snow falls, I think of Jane and her child, hoping they found the tranquility they deserved. And in those quiet moments, I'm reminded of the thin line between the living and the memories that haunt us. I used to run Cedar Grove Hospital in a tiny Midwest town, but let me tell you, what went down on July 8th, 2008 still gives me the creeps. It was like 10:30 p.m., and my girl Linda, also my assistant, and I were driving into town after a brutal day of surgeries. We were just trying to grab some grub and chill, but then this totally gnarly car accident happened and turned our night upside down. The first responders arrived quickly, only to find our car totaled and us both deceased. A tragic scene, but the real shocker was the short DV clip discovered at the crash site. The video, a 5:34 long footage shot by Linda on her digital camera's night vision mode, wasn't your average traffic camera recording. It showed us cruising down a desolate road when we suddenly spotted a figure about 20 meters ahead. Curiosity getting the best of us, we pulled over to investigate. We saw this random chick in a creepy white dress, obviously freaking out. Since we couldn't call 911, we decided to be heroes and take her to the hospital ourselves. Linda was still filming the whole thing for her vlog. But get this, every time we focused on the girl, there were these weird glitches in the video and audio. And then, at the 3-minute mark, she starts bawling and confesses that she died in a car crash last year. We brushed it off as shock until at 5:58, when she transforms into some freaky, glass-covered demon. The vid went viral, with us shrieking like banshees and the camera crashing everywhere. But the real shock came when investigators couldn't find any trace of the white-dressed girl at the accident site. Like, how is that even possible? The car was wrecked, doors jammed shut, and our bodies had to be cut out. But turns out it wasn't just some random ghost. A nurse named Laura Swanson died in a crash on the same road a year ago, and she looked exactly like the girl in our video. And to Detective Chloe Richardson, video analysis expert, who noticed something fishy about the footage. She found weird readings on the speedometer and sneaky edits where the girl's face changed. Yep, you guessed it. Looks like someone staged this whole thing. And now we're talking murder investigation with love triangles, jealousy, and professional drama in the mix. Talk about a wild ride. After intense questioning and digging for evidence, the truth slowly came out. Turns out it was a carefully plotted murder, planned by someone with a major grudge and video editing skills. The list of suspects kept growing, and the plot thickened as we delved into the hospital's politics and personal relationships. As more details emerged, alibis were shattered and deep secrets were uncovered. The case took twists and turns, leading to a jaw-dropping conclusion that pointed fingers at individuals high up in the hospital hierarchy. In the end, our car accident investigation showcased the complexities of the human mind, where reality and deception can easily blur. It showed just how far some people will go to hide the truth, and how even the most elaborate plans can be foiled by simple mistakes. The whole incident shook the community, raising questions about trust, honesty, and the dark depths of human emotions. It was a reminder that sometimes the most gripping stories come not from supernatural forces, but from the intricate workings of our own hearts. everyone. I want to share something crazy that happened near my town recently. I was walking by the local police station just as a patrol car pulled in, sirens blaring. I stepped aside to let it pass and then followed it into the yard out of curiosity. Two cops got out, hats pulled low over their eyes. They dragged a guy out of the car, handcuffed and shouting, "What did I do? What did I do?" The cops didn't answer. They just pushed him towards a small wooden building. The contrast was stark. The cops were tall and burly, while the handcuffed guy was short and skinny, barely fed to three. It looked like two bears dragging a monkey. I snuck up to the building and peeked through a crack in the door. Inside, the guy who the cops called Mike, not sure if that was his real name, was sitting on a cold metal chair. He was a taxi driver, and the cops were interrogating him about a murder that happened 7 days prior. A chauffeur had been killed. 3 years ago, Mike's red taxi had collided head-on with the victim's black Audi, both cars severely damaged. Mike kept insisting, "I didn't kill anyone." But the cops didn't seem convinced. They stood up, removed their hats, and dragged him into a darker room, closing the door with a clang. I couldn't see what happened next, but from Mikey's cries, it sounded like the cops were being rough with him. Then a phone rang. One of the cops stepped out to answer it. I overheard him say, "Oh, Uncle, don't worry. We've caught the guy who killed my cousin. Not only will I get revenge, but we'll also get some compensation out of him. No problem at all." After hanging up, he went back inside. The screams went on for about an hour, getting more and more desperate, until they sounded almost inhuman. It was chilling. Finally, the two cops came out looking exhausted and stained with what seemed like blood. They took a break, then started discussing their next move. His leg is broken. His arm too. He's tough. Didn't confess, even after all that. What if he talks? If he gets out? We can't let that happen. Let's make it look like an accident. Good idea. We'll just take a minor disciplinary action afterward. I have the idea, so you owe me a drink. Deal, but we need to do it now. Got gasoline? Yeah, under the desk. And matches. Got 'em. After their plan was set, one cop went back inside, dragging Mike out. Mike couldn't stand but was still conscious. He looked terrified, not knowing what was coming. They uncuffed one of his hands and attached it to a radiator. The other cop doused the place with gasoline, saving the last bit for Mike. Mike started begging, "Please don't. I won't say a word." But the cops weren't listening. Soon, he'd be just a charred body. Who talks to a corpse? One of the cops struck a match, ready to set everything ablaze. "Please, I'll pay you," Mike pleaded. Unmoved, the cop stepped back towards the door. I was frozen in fear and ran out of the police station. By the time I reached a safe distance, the wooden building was engulfed in flames. I could hear Mike's screams. It was horrifying. 2 days later, I heard there was a car accident near the police station. 2 cops, drunk and staggering, had been hit and killed. It was those 2 cops. The cars that hit them were a black Audi and a red taxi, crashing head-on, just like in Mike's past accident. When the police arrived, the cars were gone, leaving only the mangled bodies and blood on the street. It was eerily similar to the accident from 3 years ago. I can't shake off the feeling that there was some sort of twisted justice in how those cops met their end. It's like the past came back in the most bizarre way. Just goes to show you never really know what's happening behind closed doors. It happened a few months back on a remote mountain road somewhere in the Rockies. I'm a truck driver, by the way, and this one night, well, it was something else. I'd been driving non-stop, day and night. Tired as hell, I was fighting to keep my eyes open. Then, out of nowhere, as I was rounding this sharp bend, I saw this hunched-over old guy in the middle of the road. The headlights made his face look ghostly pale. Scared the crap out of me, and I yelled out loud. I slammed on the brakes, and there was this huge crash sound. My heart sank, and my head was buzzing. I thought I'd hit him. I jumped out looking all around the truck, but there was no one. I thought maybe I was just seeing things, you know, from the lack of sleep. I noticed a section of the guardrail was bent, and there were crushed bushes nearby. Did the old man fall off the cliff? I peered into the darkness below, but it was just this void. If he had fallen, there was no way he survived. Just as I was about to get back into the truck, I noticed a bent guardrail nearby and some crushed bushes. Damn! Did I knock the old guy off the cliff? I peered over the edge, but it was pitch black, a bottomless drop. I thought I was hallucinating from the exhaustion. I panicked, ran back to my truck and drove off as fast as I could. For the next 2 days, I was a nervous wreck, constantly expecting the cops to show up. But nothing happened, so I pushed it out of my mind and got back on the road. A few nights later, I was on the same mountain road, approaching the same bend. My heart was racing, so I floored the gas pedal, wanting to get past it as quickly as possible. But as I sped around the bend, there he was again, the same figure. I hit the brakes, but it was too late. I felt the truck roll right over him. But when I got out, he was gone again, just vanished into thin air. Now, I was really freaking out. Was I losing my mind? I drove home, shaken, trying not to think about what had just happened. I drank myself into oblivion and passed out. A couple of days later, everything was still quiet. I thought I'd dodged another bullet. But then, on my third trip on that road, at the same spot, it happened again. The same body, the same scenario. I was petrified. This time, I called the cops. They arrived quickly. "You the one who called this in?" the officer asked. I nodded dumbly. He looked around and said, "Driving tired can be deadly, you know. Where's the victim?" I pointed towards where the body should have been, but when I looked, there was nothing there. No body, no blood, nothing, just the bare road. The cop warned me about making false reports, but I insisted. Explained everything. He thought I was losing it. Eventually they took me to the station to cool off, maybe for my own safety. That night at the station, I pieced it all together. I couldn't sleep, just kept going over it in my head. It felt like I was being dragged into something way beyond my understanding. The next morning, I begged the cops to check under the cliff. They did, probably just to humor me. And they found a body, all right. But it had been there for over a year, long dead, nothing to do with my story. I was stunned. When they brought up the remains, I saw the clothes. They were familiar. I recognized them, and my blood ran cold. Days passed, and I lived in a daze, haunted by these bizarre accidents. But then, the police cracked an old hit-and-run case. The real culprit turned himself in, couldn't live with the guilt. That night I had a dream. The old man was there, smiling cryptically. He said he'd been hit and fallen off the cliff a year ago. He was looking for help at that bend, but didn't want to scare anyone. "Why me?" I asked. He said every time my truck passed, a girl sitting beside me would wave at him. I froze. "What girl?" He smiled eerily. "The one with the mole on her forehead. She's been with you for half a year, isn't she, your friend?" I woke up in a cold sweat. That took me back to a night 6 months ago. I sat there until dawn, lighting a cigarette I couldn't smoke. The next day, the truth about that old hit-and-run case came out. A truck driver had killed a young girl that night. Half a year later, he couldn't bear the guilt anymore. Some among things you just can't outrun.